Power is one of the most fascinating and dangerous forces in human history. It can shape entire nations, destroy lives, and create wealth beyond imagination. But what if I told you that the more power you have, the more likely you are to lose touch with reality? Shocking, right? In fact, a study from the University of California found that people in power are less likely to notice when others are suffering, even when it's happening right in front of them. And here's a chilling statistic. According to Transparency International, over $2.6 trillion are lost every year due to corruption. That's more than the GDP of the UK, France, and Germany combined. Yet, despite all the evidence, the truth is power can't be stopped from corrupting, and here's why. In this video, we'll break down how power changes people, why it's nearly impossible to escape its grip, and how systems of power adapt to stay in control. We'll look at the hidden strategies that keep power in the hands of a few, and explore why even the most well-intentioned leaders often fall prey to it. Stick around, because once you see how power works, you'll never look at the world the same way again. Chapter 1: The Power Paradox. Why good intentions always fail. When people first step into power, they often do so with the best intentions. They want to improve society, create change, or solve problems. But studies show that power has a strange way of twisting even the noblest minds. In the book The Dictator's Handbook by Bruce Bueno de Mesquita and Alastair Smith, they explain that power corrupts because of the basic human need to hold on to it. Good leaders, when faced with difficult choices, tend to prioritize their own position over their original ideals. Take the example of US presidents. Many enter the office with hopes of changing the world, yet their decisions often seem more about maintaining their own power. This is no accident. Research from Stanford University shows that power activates the brain's reward centers. When you're at the top, you start to crave more of it, and this can lead to poor decisions. It's like the more you get, the more you want, and the more you're willing to justify it. It's easy to point fingers at corrupt politicians, but the truth is, this happens at every level. Whether it's a corporate executive or a local leader, the behavior is strikingly similar. One key factor is the endowment effect. People who have power tend to believe they deserve it, which makes it harder for them to give it up or admit mistakes. In fact, a 2015 study by the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that people with more power are less likely to apologize, even when they make errors. They believe their position entitles them to act with less accountability. So, what starts as a desire to change the world often morphs into self-preservation. Good intentions fade, and the very systems meant to fix problems are now used to protect the person at the top. The danger? Once power is grasped, it becomes harder to let go of, and the person in charge starts to justify actions that they never would have before. Chapter 2: The Illusion of Control. A leader's truly in charge. At the top of any organization, it often feels like the leader is in full control. The world watches as they make decisions, set policies, and lead nations or corporations. But the reality is far more complex. Leaders, no matter how powerful, are often trapped by their own systems. In fact, a study conducted by Harvard Business School found that nearly 60% of executives feel like they have less control over their organizations than they did 5 years ago. It sounds surprising, right? If someone is at the top, they should be in charge. But the truth is, power becomes a game of managing multiple forces. As political scientist John Kingdon argues in Agendas, Alternatives, and Public Policies, leaders don't just make decisions, they navigate a maze of competing interests, pressures, and alliances. Often, the most powerful people are the ones who seem the least in control. Think about a country's president during a crisis. They might make a public speech, rally the citizens, and seem like the driving force behind change. But behind the scenes, they're relying on advisors, lobbyists, and bureaucrats who hold the real power. This was evident in the United States during the 2008 financial crisis. While President George W. Bush took the lead in addressing the crisis, many of the critical decisions were made by behind-the-scenes figures like Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson and Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke. The idea that leaders are in complete control is, in many ways, an illusion. Power may look like it's at the top, but it often flows from many different places. In fact, an MIT study from 2018 found that leaders who seem overly authoritative or centralized often face higher levels of internal resistance and failure. The more centralized the power, the harder it is for any single person to make effective decisions in complex systems. This is why political and business leaders often surround themselves with advisors who can offer specialized knowledge. So, while leaders may appear to be making all the decisions, the real story is more about managing a network of competing forces, each one pulling them in different directions. In the end, it's not the person at the top who holds the most power, it's the systems and people that make that power possible. Chapter 3: The Power of Secrecy. Why information is the ultimate weapon. Power thrives on secrecy. The more information a person or group can hide, the more they can control the narrative, and therefore, the people. The practice of withholding information is often what allows leaders to maintain control over others. As historian George Orwell wrote in 1984, war is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. These contradictory ideas are at the heart of how power works in societies where control over information is key. In the world of politics, it's not uncommon for leaders to restrict access to critical information, keeping the masses in the dark. This strategy is not only intentional but is central to their grip on power. For example, during the Watergate scandal, President Nixon's administration went to extreme lengths to suppress information, going as far as covering up illegal activities. Despite the cover-up, information slowly leaked out, leading to the eventual collapse of Nixon's presidency. But this was after years of strategic secrecy. But it's not just governments that use secrecy for power. In the corporate world, companies withhold key financial information from the public, creating an aura of mystery that attracts investors. A study by McKinsey & Company found that 43% of CEOs in large corporations admitted to intentionally withholding certain types of information to maintain control over the company's narrative. By managing how and when information is shared, these leaders create an environment of uncertainty that only they can navigate. Even today, social media platforms have mastered the art of secrecy, using algorithms to control what users see. While users believe they are in control of their feeds, the platforms are constantly curating what information reaches them. This not only keeps the platform in power but also shapes the opinions of millions of people. A 2020 study from the Pew Research Center found that 64% of Americans believe social media platforms have too much control over the information they see, yet most users have little idea of how these algorithms work. Secrecy, therefore, is one of the most powerful tools in any leader's arsenal. It allows them to craft their own narrative, avoid accountability, and maintain control over their followers. The more they can control information, the more they can manipulate perceptions, keeping their grip on power strong. As the saying goes, knowledge is power, but in the world of politics and business, the real power lies in controlling what others know. If you found this chapter eye-opening, don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more insights. Let's dive into the next chapter. Chapter 4: The Corruption Feedback Loop. How power creates more power. When you gain power, it doesn't just change you, it changes the system around you. Power doesn't simply sit still, it evolves. As political scientists Bruce Bueno de Mesquita and Alastair Smith argue in The Dictator's Handbook, the pursuit of power becomes a self-reinforcing cycle. The more power a leader gains, the more they need to expand it, and the more they use corruption to maintain it. This is called the corruption feedback loop. The loop begins when a leader makes decisions that benefit them personally, like allocating resources to loyal supporters or giving themselves more privileges. Over time, these actions increase their control, but also their dependence on those who help them climb the ranks. For example, when leaders in some countries face economic challenges, they often make deals with private companies or foreign powers in exchange for support. This deepens their need for more power and resources to stay afloat. A famous case of this is in Russia. Since Vladimir Putin came to power, he has slowly consolidated control over the nation's vast wealth, leading to increased corruption among the political elite. According to Transparency International's 2020 Corruption Perceptions Index, Russia scores a mere 30 out of 100, reflecting the pervasive corruption that surrounds Putin's regime. As his power grew, so did his reliance on loyalty from a small group of oligarchs who control major industries. This feedback loop is not limited to politics. It's found in business, too. A study by the Harvard Business Review found that CEOs with higher levels of personal wealth are more likely to make risky decisions that benefit themselves, rather than their companies. This happens because their growing wealth pushes them to seek even more, creating a cycle where short-term gains are prioritized over long-term sustainability. The end result? Power becomes a never-ending game. Those at the top are so entangled in the system they've built that their actions become driven by the need to protect their position. Breaking out of this loop is almost impossible, because the very structures of power reward selfishness, secrecy, and corruption. In the end, this means that the more power you gain, the more you need to feed it, until it becomes a monster that can no longer be controlled. Don't forget to subscribe for more strategies that keep the cycle of power going. Let's continue with the next chapter. Chapter 5: The Messiah Complex, Power's Dangerous Self-Justification. One of the most dangerous side effects of power is the belief that the leader knows best. This is the Messiah complex, a psychological state where a leader becomes convinced that their actions, no matter how corrupt or harmful, are justified because they are doing it for a greater good. It's the ultimate self-justification for corrupt behavior. Napoleon Bonaparte is a classic example of this. When he rose to power in France, he initially presented himself as a savior of the people. However, over time, his need for control and his belief that he was infallible led to wars, the destruction of thousands of lives, and his eventual downfall. Napoleon famously said, "The strong man is the one who is able to use the power of the state for his own personal gain," showing just how far his sense of self-importance had gone. In modern times, this complex can be seen in political leaders who justify authoritarian actions by claiming they are protecting the country or the people. A notable example is the presidency of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. He repeatedly portrayed himself as the champion of the people, yet his policies led to economic collapse and widespread poverty. According to the International Monetary Fund, IMF, Venezuela's economy contracted by over 50% from 2013 to 2018, and inflation reached a staggering 1,698,488% in 2018. Psychologically, the Messiah complex is dangerous because it allows leaders to ignore the consequences of their actions. When a leader believes they are the only one who can save their people, any action they take, no matter how unethical, becomes justified. The problem is, this mindset often blinds them to the harm they're causing. According to social psychologist Robert Cialdini, people in power often become so disconnected from reality that they see their decisions as infallible, leading to a dangerous lack of self-awareness. The issue with the Messiah complex is that it enables a leader to ignore criticism and suppress opposition. By positioning themselves as the ultimate authority, they can easily dismiss any resistance as misguided or even treacherous. This not only consolidates power but makes reform nearly impossible. The more a leader believes they are the savior, the harder it becomes for them to see the damage they are doing, both to their people and to their legacy. Chapter 6, Resistance is Futile, Why Reformers Never Win. If you've ever wondered why reformers rarely succeed in breaking the systems of power, the answer lies in how power adapts and evolves. While movements for change often have the support of the public, the systems that perpetuate power are much stronger and more resistant to change than they seem. In fact, research shows that the more entrenched the system, the harder it is to dismantle. In his book The Anatomy of Fascism, historian Robert O. Paxton explains how fascist regimes like Mussolini's Italy or Hitler's Germany adapted to resist reform. These systems didn't just impose harsh laws, they created structures that were nearly impossible to challenge. When reformers tried to challenge the status quo, they didn't face a single enemy, they fought against an entire machine, an entrenched network of power, loyalty, and fear. A prime example of this is in Egypt, where the 2011 revolution ousted President Hosni Mubarak. While Mubarak's regime seemed to fall quickly, the system that supported him, military leaders, business elites, and security forces, was still intact. As a result, even after Mubarak was gone, the same corrupt system persisted under different leadership, demonstrating the difficulty of reform in deeply entrenched power structures. According to the International Crisis Group, the Egyptian military continued to control much of the country's economy and politics even after the revolution. The same happens in businesses, where long-standing CEOs and top executives face little resistance to their power. The systems they've built, loyalty networks, profit incentives, and shareholder interests, are so well-oiled that reformers rarely succeed in shaking things up. A 2020 survey by McKinsey found that 70% of transformation efforts in large companies fail, largely because leaders are too deeply embedded in the system they've built. So, why is resistance so futile? The answer lies in the fact that power doesn't just rest with a single leader or a single policy. It exists within the very structure of the system itself. The networks, the laws, the financial incentives, these elements protect and reinforce power in ways that reformers simply cannot dismantle overnight. The more entrenched the system, the harder it becomes to break. And in many cases, reformers end up becoming part of the system they once opposed, demonstrating that power adapts in ways that make real change incredibly difficult. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to subscribe for more thought-provoking content. We'll see you in the next video.